From 1976 to 1977, New York City lived under a shadow of fear. A mysterious gunman was terrorizing the streets, choosing his victims seemingly at random and leaving cryptic letters behind. He became known as the Son of Sam, a name that would go down in criminal history. But before the panic, the headlines, and the terrifying summer nights, there was David Berkowitz, a man whose troubled childhood and growing inner turmoil led him down a dark and deadly path. If you enjoy this series and want more deep-dive true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're listening from, and let me know which case you want me to cover next. Your support helps me keep bringing you detailed and accurate storytelling. David Richard Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. His early life was marked by instability even before he had the chance to understand it. His biological mother, Elizabeth Broder, was a waitress living in difficult circumstances when David was born. His biological father, Joseph Kleinman, was married to another woman at the time and had no plans to raise a child with Elizabeth. Not long after David's birth, Elizabeth gave him up for adoption, believing it would give him a better life. At just a few days old, David was adopted by Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a working-class Jewish couple living in the Bronx. Nathan ran a hardware store, and Pearl was a devoted homemaker. They adored David, but his childhood would prove far from simple. By all accounts, David was an intelligent child, but he struggled emotionally and socially from a young age. Teachers noticed his tendency to withdraw from others, his difficulties controlling his emotions, and his bouts of intense anger. Friends and neighbors later recalled that young David often seemed lonely. Despite his adoptive parents' love, he grew up believing he had somehow been abandoned by his biological mother, a feeling that deeply affected him throughout his life. According to later psychological evaluations, he carried a constant fear of rejection and developed a deep sense of isolation, traits that would eventually spiral into something far darker. When David was 14 years old, tragedy struck. His adoptive mother, Pearl, died of breast cancer. The loss devastated him. Nathan later remarried, but David never formed a strong bond with his stepmother. He became increasingly withdrawn, showing signs of depression and frustration. Around this time, his behavioral issues escalated. He developed a fascination with petty vandalism and would set small fires around his neighborhood. Investigators later linked him to hundreds of unsolved small arsons throughout New York City, though most of these went undetected until after his arrest. After graduating from Christopher Columbus High School, David briefly attended college but struggled academically and emotionally. In 1971, at the age of 18, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, hoping it would provide him with structure and purpose. He served for about 3 years, including a deployment to South Korea. During his time in the military, he qualified as a proficient marksman, a skill that would tragically come into play later. In 1974, David was honorably discharged and returned to New York. But civilian life wasn't easy for him. He drifted between jobs, working briefly at the U.S. Postal Service, and began living alone in Yonkers, New York. Isolated and struggling mentally, Berkowitz's paranoia and feelings of abandonment deepened. During this period, he also reconnected with his biological mother, Elizabeth, discovering the circumstances of his birth and adoption. Although he initially seemed relieved to meet her, the reunion stirred even more inner conflict. He learned that his biological father had never wanted him and had pressured Elizabeth to give him up. The rejection haunted him, feeding the resentment and loneliness that had been building for years. By 1975, Berkowitz's mental state had deteriorated significantly. He became obsessed with the idea that demonic forces were influencing him, a belief he later claimed was fueled by interactions with neighbors who practiced occult rituals. Living at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers, he developed a fixation on his neighbor Sam Carr and Carr's dog. In later confessions, Berkowitz claimed he believed the dog was possessed by a demon and was transmitting commands from Satan himself, ordering him to kill. While this explanation shocked many, psychiatrists later suggested that Berkowitz may have been experiencing a psychotic break, worsened by undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia or other severe mental health conditions. Whether fully delusional or partially rationalizing his actions, Berkowitz began to plan attacks. In the summer of 1976, his violent transformation became reality. On the night of July 29, 1976, two young women, Donna Lauria and Jody Valenti, were sitting in a parked car outside Lauria's apartment in the Bronx after returning from a night out. At approximately 1:10 a.m., Berkowitz approached the car, drew a .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver, and opened fire. Donna was killed instantly, while Jody was injured but survived. At the time, the attack seemed random, and police had no idea it would be the first in a string of shootings that would grip the entire city. Over the next several months, Berkowitz struck again and again, targeting young couples sitting in parked cars or walking late at night. The randomness of his attacks and his ability to evade capture sent New York City into a state of near panic. By the end of 1976, the press began to take serious notice. The city, already struggling with economic turmoil, rising crime rates, and widespread fear, was about to become the stage for one of the most infamous manhunts in U.S. history. By the fall of 1976, New York City was already rattled from the series of shootings that had left 2 people dead and 4 others wounded, but investigators still hadn't connected all the incidents to a single perpetrator. At this point, David Berkowitz was leading an unremarkable life on the surface. He was living alone in an apartment in Yonkers, working for the U.S. Postal Service, and blending into society in a way that made him nearly invisible. But inside, his compulsions were growing stronger, his resentment against women deepening, and his delusions increasingly blurring the line between reality and the violent fantasies consuming his thoughts. The city remained largely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface until another attack occurred on the night of October 23, 1976. 20-year-old Carl Denaro and his date, Rosemary Keenan, were sitting in a parked car in Queens when someone approached them and opened fire. 5 shots shattered the windows, and Carl was struck in the head, sustaining serious injuries. Miraculously, he survived, but Rosemary escaped unscathed. At the time, police suspected it was a random act of violence, perhaps connected to gang activity, and they didn't link it to the previous shootings. Less than a month later, on November 26, Berkowitz struck again. 2 teenage girls, Donna DeMazy and Joan Lomino, were returning home after a night out when a man approached them on the sidewalk and asked for directions. Without warning, he pulled a gun and fired several shots, hitting Joanne in the back and leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. Donna survived physically, but the psychological trauma would linger for years. Despite the brutality of this incident, police still failed to connect it to the earlier attacks, largely because the weapon used had not yet been identified as the same .44 caliber revolver that Berkowitz favored. By early 1977, New York City was simmering with fear and tension. The cold winter didn't stop Berkowitz, whose inner compulsion to kill was intensifying. On January 30th, Christine Freund and her fiancé, John Deal, were sitting in their car outside a Queens discotheque when Berkowitz approached and opened fire. Christine was struck twice and later died from her injuries. It was at this point that detectives began to suspect they were dealing with a serial shooter. Ballistics tests confirmed that the bullets from this attack matched those from an earlier incident, the killing of Donna Lauria in July 1976. Finally, police had a common thread, a .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver. The press seized on the emerging pattern, and by March 1977, a chilling nickname began circulating: the .44 caliber killer. Headlines were splashed across the city's newspapers, stoking public fear and anger. For Berkowitz, this attention was intoxicating. He followed the coverage obsessively, cutting out articles and saving them in his apartment like trophies. But he also felt emboldened, believing his actions had transformed him from an ordinary man into a figure of power and terror. On March 8, 1977, he struck again. College student Virginia Voskerikian was walking home in Queens when Berkowitz approached her on the sidewalk and shot her in the head at close range. She died instantly. Witnesses described seeing a man fleeing the scene, but there was little else for police to go on. The randomness of the attacks terrified New Yorkers. The victims varied in age and background, but there was one recurring theme. Most of them were young women with long, dark hair, a detail that would later come to define his victim profile. By this time, detectives had assembled a task force to handle the case, nicknamed Operation Omega. Hundreds of officers were reassigned to work exclusively on tracking down the killer. Investigators pored over thousands of leads, but they were overwhelmed by the sheer size of the city and the lack of any consistent witness descriptions. Berkowitz's method of attack, approaching parked cars or unsuspecting pedestrians, made him nearly impossible to predict. Frustration inside the NYPD was mounting, but Berkowitz remained one step ahead. In April 1977, Berkowitz escalated his game by directly taunting the police and the media. He left his first handwritten letter near the body of his next victims, Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani, who were shot to death while sitting in a parked car in the Bronx on April 17. The letter, addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli, was filled with disturbing language and signed for the first time with the name that would soon become infamous: Son of Sam. In it, Berkowitz referred to himself as the servant of a demonic entity named Sam, who commanded him to kill. While some detectives believed this was simply a manipulative tactic, Berkowitz would later insist in interviews that he truly believed his neighbor's dog was possessed and transmitting commands from a demon named Sam, an element that would become central to his confessions after his arrest. When the media published excerpts from the letter, public hysteria exploded. Women rushed to hair salons to cut or dye their hair, fearful of fitting the type Berkowitz seemed to target. Nightlife activity in New York dropped dramatically as people avoided going out after dark. The city was in a near-constant state of tension, and politicians began pressuring the NYPD to capture the killer as quickly as possible. Despite the heightened fear, Berkowitz didn't slow down. On June 26, 1977, he shot Sal Lupo and Judy Placido as they left a Queens disco. Both survived, but their descriptions of the shooter were vague and inconsistent, adding little progress to the investigation. Meanwhile, Operation Omega investigators combed through tens of thousands of tips but still lacked a solid lead. Then came July 31, 1977, the night of Berkowitz's final attack. 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz and her date, Robert Violante, were sitting in a parked car in Brooklyn when Berkowitz approached and fired 4 shots. Stacy was fatally wounded, and Robert was blinded in one eye. But this time, there was a break. A witness noticed a man loitering near the scene before the shooting and later reported seeing a suspicious vehicle parked nearby. Police traced the car to David Berkowitz in Yonkers. Even then, Berkowitz's arrest didn't come immediately. Investigators began quietly surveilling his apartment, where they discovered his car had a parking ticket from the night of the Moskowitz shooting, the crucial piece of evidence that tied him directly to the scene. On August 10, 1977, NYPD detectives moved in. As Berkowitz exited his apartment building, they approached cautiously, expecting resistance. Instead, he smiled and said calmly, "Well, you got me." When questioned, Berkowitz quickly confessed to the shootings but added bizarre claims about demonic possession and supernatural influences. While some officers believed he might be faking insanity, psychiatrists who examined him later diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. During interrogations, he provided chillingly detailed accounts of each attack, explaining his tactics, his thought processes, and the compulsion that drove him to hunt his victims. The press frenzy surrounding his capture was unprecedented. Crowds gathered outside police headquarters, and reporters fought for every possible detail about the man who had held the city hostage for over a year. Berkowitz seemed to relish the attention at first, basking in his newfound infamy. However, the legal proceedings against him would reveal a far more complex picture, one that blended mental illness, isolation, and deep-seated anger into a volatile mix. By the time Berkowitz was charged, he faced 6 counts of murder and numerous counts of attempted murder and assault. His trial, which would begin in 1978, promised to be one of the most closely watched in American history. But behind the scenes, there were growing debates among lawyers, psychologists, and the public over whether Berkowitz was sane enough to stand trial, and whether his claims of demonic control had any place in the courtroom. After David Berkowitz's arrest on August 10, 1977, the city of New York breathed a collective sigh of relief. For over a year, the son of Sam had terrorized millions, striking seemingly at random and leaving young couples and women with long, dark hair living in constant fear. Now, the man behind the murders was in custody, but the story was far from over. As the details of his confessions, mental state, and motives came to light, the public became more fascinated and disturbed than ever before. In his first interviews with investigators, Berkowitz offered chillingly detailed recollections of each shooting, describing where he stood, how he aimed, and even the sounds his victims made when they fell. What shocked detectives was how calm and matter-of-fact he seemed, as though he were recounting something ordinary. He also introduced them to one of the strangest claims of the entire case, that his neighbor Sam Carr's black Labrador retriever, Harvey, was possessed by a demon, and that this demon commanded him to kill. Sam, the entity Berkowitz claimed to serve, was supposedly communicating instructions through the dog, pushing him toward murder. While this explanation was initially dismissed by some investigators as an elaborate ploy, Berkowitz insisted it was true. He said he had been drawn into a war between good and evil, and that the killings were part of a larger mission. Psychiatrists brought in to evaluate him debated whether these beliefs stemmed from genuine psychosis or a calculated attempt to avoid the death penalty. Several diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, citing auditory hallucinations, delusional thinking, and a long history of mental health struggles. Others argued that, despite his bizarre beliefs, Berkowitz was competent enough to understand the difference between right and wrong. Meanwhile, the legal process moved quickly. Berkowitz was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder, 1 for each person he killed, as well as multiple counts of attempted murder and assault. Prosecutors initially prepared for a full trial, expecting to argue that Berkowitz was sane and fully responsible for his actions. But the defense team strongly considered an insanity plea, citing his supposed demonic influences and diagnosed schizophrenia. The prospect of a lengthy, high-profile trial divided the city. Some wanted Berkowitz executed, calling for reinstatement of the death penalty in New York, which had been abolished 2 years earlier. Others argued that he needed psychiatric treatment, not punishment. The media frenzy intensified these debates, with newspapers publishing sensational headlines and television crews swarming every court appearance. Berkowitz, for his part, seemed to thrive on the attention at times, occasionally smiling for cameras or delivering cryptic statements. Then, in May 1978, Berkowitz abruptly changed his approach. Against his lawyer's advice, he announced that he wished to plead guilty to all charges. On June 12, 1978, in a Manhattan courtroom packed with reporters and spectators, Berkowitz calmly admitted to 6 murders and several attempted murders. His monotone delivery stunned many observers, as did his lack of visible remorse. During the proceedings, he declared, "I am the son of Sam." At one point, when asked by the judge why he committed the crimes, he simply responded, "It was Sam's command. I had no choice." Courtroom officials recalled a chilling silence following his words, as if the entire room was trying to process the surreal blend of confession and delusion. Despite his guilty plea, Berkowitz's sentencing hearing on June 12 took an unexpected and disturbing turn. While seated at the defense table, he suddenly attempted to leap at the presiding judge, shouting, "I'd kill her again!" in reference to one of his victims. Court officers quickly subdued him and removed him from the room, delaying the hearing. When it resumed, psychiatrists testified about his mental state, with some emphasizing that he exhibited classic symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, while others argued he was manipulative and fully aware of his actions. Ultimately, Berkowitz was sentenced to 25 years to life for each of the 6 murders, with the sentences to run consecutively. In effect, this guaranteed that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. After the sentencing, he was transferred to the Attica Correctional Facility, one of New York's most notorious maximum security prisons. Life inside Attica brought another strange twist in Berkowitz's story. While incarcerated, he continued to make bizarre statements about demons and secret forces influencing his actions. However, over time, his demeanor began to shift. In 1987, a decade after his arrest, Berkowitz claimed to have undergone a religious transformation. After a fellow inmate gave him a Bible, he said he became a born-again Christian, referring to himself as the Son of Hope, rather than the Son of Sam. In letters to evangelical pastors and Christian organizations, Berkowitz described his conversion as genuine and insisted that he had repented for his crimes. He also began writing essays and maintaining correspondence with religious supporters on the outside. While some welcomed his newfound faith as a sign of rehabilitation, others, particularly victims' families, viewed it with deep skepticism, seeing it as another manipulation for attention. Meanwhile, Berkowitz's crimes continued to fascinate journalists, criminologists, and the public at large. In 1979, Maury Terry, an investigative reporter for the New York Post, published a groundbreaking series of articles suggesting that Berkowitz had not acted entirely alone. According to Terry, there was evidence that Berkowitz was involved with a satanic cult operating in Yonkers and that the Son of Sam murders were part of a larger ritualistic conspiracy. Terry's claims were based partly on cryptic references in Berkowitz's letters and on possible connections between some of the crime scenes and known cult activity in the area. He argued that other individuals may have been present at several shootings and that Berkowitz had hinted at accomplices during interviews. Berkowitz himself would later confirm parts of this theory, claiming in the 1990s that he hadn't acted alone, though he remained vague about the identities of the others supposedly involved. Despite Terry's investigation and Berkowitz's statements, official law enforcement agencies, including the NYPD, have maintained that Berkowitz acted alone. However, the persistent speculation about a broader network of cult-related crimes kept the Son of Sam case alive in the media long after his sentencing. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Berkowitz's name would periodically resurface whenever new books, documentaries, or anniversary retrospectives explored his crimes. He participated in several interviews from prison, speaking alternately about his religious transformation, his regrets, and his continued belief in a battle between good and evil. In some interviews, he was calm and soft-spoken. In others, he seemed to slip back into the unsettling detachment that characterized his original confessions. The Son of Sam case also had lasting effects on legislation. In 1977, just after Berkowitz's arrest, New York passed the Son of Sam Law, which prohibited criminals from profiting from the publicity of their crimes through book deals, movies, or interviews. While the original law was later struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1991 for being too broad, modified versions remain in effect today, designed to ensure that any profits are directed toward victims and their families. Inside prison, Berkowitz has spent decades living a relatively quiet life compared to the chaos of his earlier years. He has avoided major disciplinary issues and works as a peer counselor for other inmates. He's also maintained his identity as a devout Christian, continuing to write letters of faith and operating an online ministry through volunteers who manage his website. Yet, even as Berkowitz speaks publicly about redemption, he has repeatedly refused opportunities for parole. Starting in 2002, he became eligible for parole hearings every 2 years, but he has consistently stated that he does not believe he should ever be released, acknowledging the enormity of his crimes. In one letter he wrote, "I have no interest in freedom. I've done terrible things, and I belong here." The story of David Berkowitz's trial and life in prison highlights the enduring complexities of his case. While his guilty plea resolved the immediate legal questions, deeper mysteries remain. Was he truly driven by psychosis? Did he act alone, or were others involved? And can a man who committed such horrifying crimes genuinely find spiritual redemption? These questions continue to spark debate decades later, and Berkowitz himself has remained a reluctant but persistent figure in American criminal history. After David Berkowitz was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms in June 1978, many believed the Son of Sam case had finally come to an end. The killer had confessed, the terror had stopped, and New York City could begin to heal. But for some investigators and journalists, Unanswered questions lingered, questions that would eventually spiral into one of the most controversial criminal investigations of the late 20th century. These doubts were fueled by inconsistencies in Berkowitz's confessions, the peculiar letters he left behind, and the disturbing possibility that he hadn't acted alone. The earliest seeds of suspicion were planted even before Berkowitz's trial concluded. Detectives working the case had noticed inconsistencies in eyewitness descriptions from multiple shooting scenes. While Berkowitz certainly matched some reports, dark hair, medium build, and wearing clothes similar to those described by survivors, other witnesses claimed they saw different individuals fleeing several attacks. Some described a man taller and heavier than Berkowitz. Others swore they saw more than one person in the area shortly before shots were fired. Initially, these conflicting accounts were dismissed as the natural chaos of traumatic events. Witnesses often misremembered details under extreme stress, and police believed the simplest explanation was the correct one. Berkowitz was the shooter in all 6 killings and attempted murders. But one journalist wasn't convinced. That journalist was Maury Terry, a reporter for the New York Post, whose work would change the way people viewed the Son of Sam case. Terry began his investigation in 1977, around the time Berkowitz was arrested. He meticulously studied the letters Berkowitz sent to police and the media during his killing spree. Those letters were rambling, cryptic, and full of bizarre references to satanic figures, secret commands, and shadowy sons and daughters of dark forces. At first, police had assumed the letters were simply the delusional writings of a mentally unstable killer, but Terry noticed something troubling. The references were unusually specific. Names, symbols, and phrases used in the letters bore striking resemblances to real occult rituals and groups operating in the United States at the time. Digging deeper, Terry uncovered an unsettling connection to Berkowitz's Yonkers neighborhood, specifically to a local family, the Carrs, who lived near Berkowitz and whose dog, Harvey, Berkowitz once claimed was possessed by a demon commanding him to kill. According to Terry's research, Sam Carr, the patriarch of the family, had 2 sons, John and Michael, who were rumored to be heavily involved in occult practices. Terry theorized that Berkowitz was not a lone killer but part of a larger network, possibly a satanic cult, and that several of the shootings were carried out by different members of this group. He tied this to a possible nationwide underground network of ritualistic practices, linking Berkowitz's writings to other unsolved murders and strange events across the country. For example, Terry highlighted a symbol scrawled on one of the Son of Sam letters, a strange W, with interlocking lines, and claimed it matched symbols used by known cults in California. He also discovered that Michael Carr had ties to a group known as the Children, a secretive faction with alleged links to ritualistic ceremonies. Terry's theory became more compelling after Michael Carr died in a suspicious car accident in 1979, just 2 years after Berkowitz's arrest. In 1985, Terry published his findings in a book titled The Ultimate Evil, which presented a detailed case for a broader conspiracy behind the Son of Sam murders. The book argued that Berkowitz had personally committed some of the shootings but that others were carried out by cult associates. It also suggested that the group might have been tied to other unsolved killings and ritualistic crimes, including cases on the West Coast. When asked directly about these theories, Berkowitz himself initially avoided answering questions. But by the early 1990s, his position shifted. In a series of interviews from prison, Berkowitz confirmed parts of Terry's theory. He admitted he hadn't acted alone, claiming that members of a satanic cult were involved in planning and carrying out several attacks. According to him, while he pulled the trigger in some shootings, others were committed by different individuals entirely, individuals he refused to name directly, though he implied that some were now dead. In one interview, Berkowitz stated, "There are other people out there. I can't give you names, but I wasn't the only one. Some of the shootings, yes, I did them. But others, no." These revelations reignited public interest in the Son of Sam case, leading to renewed investigations by private researchers and journalists. However, law enforcement largely resisted reopening the case. The NYPD and prosecutors maintained that Berkowitz had acted alone and that there was insufficient evidence to support Terry's claims. Detectives who worked on the original task force argued that Berkowitz's later statements were unreliable, pointing out that he had already admitted guilt in court and that his shifting narratives might simply be another attempt to stay relevant. Despite official skepticism, the Yonkers Police Department quietly launched a limited review of Terry's findings in the 1990s. Internal reports revealed they had indeed found possible links between Berkowitz and known occult gatherings in the area, as well as circumstantial evidence tying other individuals to at least 2 shooting scenes. But without physical evidence or living witnesses willing to testify, the department ultimately concluded that the case couldn't be formally reopened. Meanwhile, Berkowitz's own explanations evolved further. In later writings, he blended his claims about cult involvement with his born-again Christian identity, saying he had been under Satan's power during the time of the murders. He described secret rituals, sacrifices, and coded messages exchanged between cult members but insisted that he had since renounced all connections to those groups. This dual narrative, one part confession, one part redemption story, created ongoing tension between those who believed him and those who didn't. Skeptics pointed out that Berkowitz had a history of manipulating narratives, from his initial demon dog explanation to his later embrace of Christianity. Supporters, however, argued that his details about the cult's inner workings were too specific to be fabricated entirely. The release of Terry's book and Berkowitz's subsequent claims had lasting cultural effects. Documentaries, television specials, and investigative reports kept the possibility of a broader conspiracy alive for decades. In 2021, Netflix released the documentary, The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, which revisited Terry's theories and featured recordings of Berkowitz speaking about the alleged cult connections. The series highlighted just how deeply Terry had immersed himself in the investigation, to the point where it consumed much of his personal life and ultimately became his lifelong obsession. Even with the renewed attention, the official stance has not changed. David Berkowitz is legally and formally considered the sole perpetrator of the Son of Sam murders. No additional suspects have ever been charged, and the case remains officially closed. Yet, among independent researchers and members of law enforcement who've studied the case extensively, many still acknowledge that some details remain unresolved. To this day, Berkowitz continues to suggest, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, that there were others involved. He has stated that he doesn't want to reopen old wounds for the families of his victims, which is one reason he claims to hold back details. In a 2017 interview marking the 40th anniversary of his arrest, he said, "I did what I did, and I'm responsible for it. But it's not the whole story." This uncertainty has fueled decades of speculation and has left an unsettling legacy. While the nightmare of 1976 and 1977 ended when Berkowitz was captured, the unanswered questions about who knew what, and whether the Son of Sam murders were truly the work of one man, continue to haunt investigators, historians, and the families of the victims. After his conviction in June 1978, David Berkowitz was transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, one of the state's most secure prisons. At just 25 years old, he was entering what would effectively be the rest of his life behind bars. He had been sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, meaning that even with good behavior, parole was an unlikely possibility until well into the 21st century. At first, Berkowitz struggled to adapt to prison life. He remained withdrawn, quiet, and emotionally detached, traits that had been present long before his arrest. Inmates treated him with a mix of hostility and curiosity. Some feared him because of his notoriety, while others saw him as an opportunity to gain attention. Berkowitz quickly learned that his infamy as the Son of Sam made him a target inside. In 1979, just a year after arriving at Clinton, Berkowitz was attacked in his cell by another inmate. The assailant slashed Berkowitz's neck with a razor blade, leaving a deep wound that required over 50 stitches. When questioned about the attack, Berkowitz refused to name his attacker or cooperate with prison authorities. Some speculated it was retaliation for his crimes, while others believed it was related to his alleged ties to a cult, which continued to swirl as rumors inside and outside the prison walls. This near-death experience marked a turning point for Berkowitz. Although he survived, it seemed to deepen his introspection. He began writing in journals, reading extensively, and seeking meaning in his life. At the time, he did not yet identify as religious, but these early years of incarceration planted the seeds for a transformation that would come later. Throughout the 1980s, Berkowitz began to distance himself from the sensationalized Son of Sam persona that had consumed the public narrative. He stopped granting frequent interviews and refused most requests from journalists. However, the lingering questions surrounding his case, especially the cult conspiracy theories raised by Maury Terry and others, continued to follow him. Occasionally, Berkowitz would drop hints in letters to researchers, implying that not all was as it seemed during the summer of 1976 and 1977. He would neither fully confirm nor fully deny Terry's findings, which only fueled speculation further. By the mid-1980s, Berkowitz's spiritual journey took a significant turn. In 1987, while serving his sentence at the Sullivan Correctional Facility, he was handed a Bible by a fellow inmate. Berkowitz later claimed that one night, while reading Psalm 34, he experienced what he described as a profound spiritual awakening. He said he fell to his knees in his cell and prayed for forgiveness, dedicating his life to God. From that point on, Berkowitz began referring to himself as a born-again Christian. He distanced himself from his previous claims about demonic possession and satanic influences, instead framing his crimes as the result of his personal brokenness and separation from God. Berkowitz began signing his letters Son of Hope, rather than Son of Sam, and started writing essays, devotionals, and testimonies about his faith. In the years that followed, Berkowitz became heavily involved in religious outreach within the prison. He began counseling other inmates, leading Bible studies, and contributing to Christian publications. He also launched a website, run by supporters on the outside, since inmates have no internet access, where he shared his writings and urged people to find redemption through faith. Despite his newfound spirituality, Berkowitz did not shy away from acknowledging his past. He repeatedly expressed remorse for the pain he had caused, both in his writings and in the rare interviews he agreed to give. In a 1999 interview with Larry King Live, Berkowitz told viewers, "I am so deeply sorry for what I've done. I know I can never undo the pain I've caused. But I have asked God for forgiveness, and I believe He has given me a new heart." However, Berkowitz's transformation was not universally accepted. Many victims' families remained skeptical, seeing his newfound faith as an attempt to soften his image or manipulate public perception. Others, however, cautiously engaged with him. In a few notable cases, relatives of Berkowitz's victims wrote letters to him, expressing their struggles with forgiveness and, in some cases, extending it to him. Berkowitz responded to many of these letters personally, expressing humility and remorse. During the 1990s and 2000s, Berkowitz was transferred between several facilities due to security concerns and administrative changes. By 2002, he had settled at the Shandam Correctional Facility in Ulster County, New York, where he became a fixture in the prison's faith-based programs. Meanwhile, public interest in his case continued to grow. The release of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, and ongoing theories about cult involvement kept Berkowitz in the headlines. Berkowitz sometimes acknowledged these theories more openly during this period. In several letters and interviews, he stated that while he personally committed some of the shootings, others were planned and carried out by people connected to a cult operating in Yonkers at the time. However, he often refused to elaborate further, saying he did not want to cause additional pain to victims' families or invite danger upon himself. This reluctance to fully explain the alleged cult connections left the public divided. Some saw his statements as further proof that more individuals were involved in the Son of Sam shootings, while others believed Berkowitz was simply fueling conspiracy theories for attention. The NYPD, for its part, remained steadfast in its conclusion that Berkowitz acted alone, officially closing the case shortly after his conviction in 1978. In 2002, Berkowitz surprised many by announcing that he would no longer seek parole. Although technically eligible to apply after 25 years, He stated in an open letter that he did not deserve to be released and wanted to spend the rest of his life in prison as part of his spiritual penance. In his words, "In all honesty, I believe I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I've surrendered my future into God's hands, and I seek only to serve Him and help others here." Despite his declaration, Berkowitz was automatically scheduled for parole hearings every 2 years as required by law. Each time, he declined to argue for his release, consistently telling the board that he did not belong outside the prison walls. The parole board, in turn, has denied his release at every hearing, citing both the severity of his crimes and the ongoing trauma experienced by victims' families. Berkowitz's evolving identity, from a feared killer to a self-proclaimed son of hope, has made him one of the most complex figures in American criminal history. To some, his transformation represents a genuine path of redemption, evidence that even someone capable of great evil can change. To others, it's a manipulative rebranding of a man who once terrorized New York City. By the 2010s, Berkowitz had settled into a relatively quiet existence behind bars. He continued his prison ministry, wrote regularly for Christian publications, and exchanged letters with supporters and curious correspondents around the world. In 2011, he survived a mild heart attack and underwent successful surgery, afterwards saying he viewed his survival as a second chance to serve God. Despite decades of relative calm, Berkowitz remained a figure of fascination for journalists, true crime researchers, and documentary filmmakers. In 2021, the Netflix documentary, The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, revisited Maury Terry's theories and featured rare recordings of Berkowitz reflecting on his life, his crimes, and his faith. The documentary sparked renewed debate over whether Berkowitz's account of cult involvement had any truth to it, or whether the original police investigation left critical details unresolved. Today, David Berkowitz continues to serve his sentence at Shandong Correctional Facility. Now in his 70s, he maintains his role as a prison chaplain's assistant, offering guidance and religious support to fellow inmates. His website, maintained by outside volunteers, shares his essays, personal reflections, and apologies to victims' families. He claims he has fully dedicated his life to helping others and living peacefully, yet his name remains permanently tied to one of the darkest chapters in New York City's history. The transformation from the notorious Son of Sam to the reflective Son of Hope has not erased the horrors of 1976 and 1977, nor has it brought closure to many of the families who lost loved ones. But for Berkowitz himself, the decades behind bars have become less about his past and more about his faith. At least, that is how he chooses to frame his story today. Even so, unanswered questions remain. Was Berkowitz truly the sole perpetrator of the Son of Sam shootings? Or were there others involved who were never caught? Why has he never provided full details, despite his repeated hints? And what does redemption really mean when weighed against the suffering of so many victims and their families? Those questions continue to. By the early 2000s, David Berkowitz had already spent more than 2 decades behind bars, and his life had entered a period of relative stability. Having embraced his faith and taken on the identity of the Son of Hope, Berkowitz immersed himself in prison ministry work at the Shandong Correctional Facility in New York. He led Bible studies, counseled inmates, and became something of a spiritual mentor to those around him. However, outside the prison walls, his name remained forever synonymous with terror. The wounds from the Son of Sam killings had never truly healed for many New Yorkers, and the passage of time did little to diminish the anger and pain felt by the victims' families. Even though Berkowitz had publicly stated in 2002 that he would no longer seek parole, the law required that he be scheduled for hearings every 2 years. This created a routine cycle of media attention. In the months leading up to each hearing, headlines would resurface, victims' relatives would give emotional statements, and the public's outrage would be reignited. Berkowitz, however, rarely contested the parole board's decisions. In nearly every hearing, he told the board that he accepted his punishment and believed he should remain in prison for the rest of his life. He claimed that his focus was on his faith and helping others behind bars, not on personal freedom. Yet, the automatic hearings still served as painful reminders for survivors and families. Many traveled to the hearings to read statements about how the killings had affected their lives, some expressing outrage at the idea that Berkowitz could ever walk free, while others admitted that, though they had found personal peace, they couldn't forget the devastation of 1976 and 1977. Berkowitz listened quietly to these statements, but never argued against them. According to transcripts, he consistently acknowledged their pain and expressed remorse, telling the board that he did not expect forgiveness. As the years went on, Berkowitz's claims about his transformation and his ongoing religious devotion drew mixed reactions from the public. For some, his new identity as the Son of Hope came across as a genuine reflection of personal change. Supporters of his ministry shared stories of inmates who turned their lives around after counseling with Berkowitz. They pointed to his writings, which included lengthy essays about redemption, morality, and the dangers of spiritual emptiness, as proof that he had renounced the darkness that once consumed him. For others, though, his transformation seemed calculated and manipulative. Critics, including several victims' families and law enforcement officials, argued that Berkowitz's religious persona was an attempt to rewrite his legacy and garner sympathy. They pointed out that he continued to give selective interviews, appear in documentaries, and drop cryptic hints about broader conspiracies without ever fully coming clean. To skeptics, these behaviors suggested a man still drawn to attention, not one who had fully renounced his past. One of the most persistent topics surrounding Berkowitz during this period was the question of whether he had acted alone during the Son of Sam killings. Journalist Maury Terry's influential 1987 book, The Ultimate Evil, laid out a theory that Berkowitz was part of a broader satanic cult connected to multiple murders. According to Terry, several people associated with the Yonkers neighborhood where Berkowitz lived, including members of the Carr family, were involved in rituals and plots that extended beyond Berkowitz's admitted crimes. For years, Berkowitz dismissed or deflected questions about the cult theory, but beginning in the late 1990s and continuing into the 2000s, he became more open about it. In multiple letters, Berkowitz suggested that he had not acted entirely on his own. While he never provided a complete account, he acknowledged knowing people connected to occult practices, and claimed that he had been heavily influenced and manipulated by them. He hinted that some of the murders had been planned by others and implied that he feared retribution if he revealed too much. These cryptic statements fueled ongoing debates among true crime researchers, law enforcement, and the public. Some believed Berkowitz's claims, citing inconsistencies in the case evidence and witness descriptions that didn't perfectly match Berkowitz's appearance. Others accused him of intentionally misleading investigators, arguing that his cult narrative was either an excuse or a way to keep his name in the news decades after his crimes. Despite his hints, the NYPD and prosecutors maintained their stance that Berkowitz acted alone, and the case officially remained closed. In 2017, Berkowitz faced a significant health crisis. He underwent emergency heart surgery at Albany Medical Center after suffering blocked arteries. The surgery was successful, but it marked a turning point in his life. Now in his 60s and physically weaker, Berkowitz began to speak more openly about his mortality. In interviews, he described the experience as a wake-up call and said it reinforced his belief that his purpose in life was to minister to others rather than seek freedom. After the surgery, he wrote on his website, "My body is weaker now, but my faith is stronger than ever. I will continue to do what I can with whatever time God has left for me." Following the surgery, Berkowitz returned to Shangam Correctional Facility, where he resumed his ministry and daily routine. Over the years, his writings expanded beyond personal reflections to include broader messages about morality and redemption. He wrote essays cautioning young people against destructive influences, urging them to find meaning and purpose before making irreversible mistakes. Supporters maintained the Son of Hope website on his behalf, sharing these writings with the outside world. In 2021, Netflix released the documentary series, The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, which brought renewed attention to Berkowitz and Maury Terry's theories. The series presented archival footage, police reports, and interviews suggesting that the official investigation into the Son of Sam murders left many unanswered questions. Berkowitz participated indirectly by allowing his recorded statements to be used, though he remained vague when pressed about the cult allegations. The documentary reignited debates among viewers, with some convinced that Berkowitz's claims held merit and others dismissing them as sensationalized. The release of the documentary also revived public interest in Berkowitz himself. While some audiences were intrigued by the mystery surrounding his case, others were frustrated by the platform given to him after so many years. Victims' families, in particular, expressed exhaustion over having to relive the events each time a new book, film, or documentary revisited the Son of Sam story. Some criticized Berkowitz for participating in any form, arguing that his cooperation with the media contradicted his claims of humility and repentance. By this time, Berkowitz had spent more than 40 years in prison. His continued insistence that he would not seek release became one of the defining aspects of his later life. In parole hearings throughout the 2010s and 2020s, he reiterated his acceptance of a life sentence. The parole board, in turn, consistently denied release, citing the severity of his crimes and the lasting trauma he caused. Berkowitz himself appeared resigned to this reality, often stating that he felt at peace with remaining behind bars until his death. In private correspondence, Berkowitz continued to engage with both supporters and skeptics. Many people around the world wrote to him seeking explanations, closure, or insight into his transformation. He responded to some of these letters, often sharing his religious perspective and urging others to find forgiveness and healing. However, when questioned directly about the cult theories or specific details of the murders, Berkowitz often deflected, claiming he no longer wished to revisit the past in graphic detail. This evasiveness frustrated some researchers who believed he held critical information that could potentially solve lingering mysteries. Despite his age and declining health, Berkowitz's influence within the prison community grew stronger over time. Other inmates frequently turned to him for counseling, not because of his notoriety but because of his reputation as someone who listened without judgment. He led prayer groups, helped organize chapel services, and often described himself as just another sinner trying to walk the right path. Even so, Berkowitz's notoriety outside prison walls ensured that his name would forever be linked to fear, tragedy, and one of the darkest chapters in New York City's history. While he sought to redefine himself as a man of faith, for many people he remained, first and foremost, the Son of Sam. The tension between these two identities, one rooted in terror, the other in redemption, defined the narrative of his later life. By the mid-2020s, David Berkowitz had lived behind bars for nearly half a century. His health challenges and advancing age limited his physical activities, but his prison ministry remained central to his purpose. Whether viewed as a man transformed or a manipulative figure seeking control over his narrative, Berkowitz's story continues to provoke discussion and divide public opinion. For some, his path represents the possibility of redemption, while for others, it serves as a reminder of irreparable damage that cannot be undone. By the time David Berkowitz entered his 70s, he had already spent over 4 decades behind prison walls. For many, the Son of Sam name was a distant nightmare, a relic of New York City's darkest days in the late 1970s. But for victims' families, investigators, and true crime researchers, Berkowitz's story remained an open wound, both because of the devastation caused and because of the lingering questions surrounding the case. Even decades after his arrest, debates about his involvement, his motives, and the possibility of accomplices continued to stir discussions among law enforcement and the public alike. In the years following his emergency heart surgery in 2017, Berkowitz's health declined gradually. He remained housed at Shangum Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in Wallkill, New York, where he continued his role as a prison ministry leader. Despite physical limitations, he now used a cane and occasionally required assistance. Berkowitz kept his focus on counseling other inmates, leading prayer groups, and writing spiritual essays for the Son of Hope ministry website. He often stated that his purpose was no longer to dwell on his crimes, but to help others avoid paths of destruction. However, Berkowitz could never fully escape the cycle of media attention tied to his parole hearings. Under New York state law, inmates serving indeterminate life sentences are entitled to a parole review every 2 years, even if they don't actively seek release. Berkowitz had publicly stated several times, most notably in 2002 and again in 2016, that he did not want to be paroled, claiming he accepted his punishment and wished to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Yet, the hearings proceeded automatically, and each time they reignited painful memories for survivors and families of his victims. During these hearings, Berkowitz's statements were often consistent. He expressed deep remorse, apologized to the families, and admitted that there were no words sufficient to repair the harm he caused. In one transcript from a 2018 hearing, he told the parole board, "I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I cannot undo what I've done." The board, as it had in every previous review, denied parole, citing both the seriousness of his crimes and the ongoing public safety concerns. For the victims' families, this brought relief but also reopened emotional wounds. Many continued to attend the hearings, some giving impassioned speeches about the loss they still felt after more than 40 years. While Berkowitz himself seemed resigned to his fate, public interest in the Son of Sam case surged again in the 2020s. In 2021, Netflix released the documentary series, The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, which revisited not only the original investigation but also the theories proposed by journalist Maury Terry. Terry had long argued that Berkowitz was not acting alone, that he was part of a broader network of individuals tied to occult practices and potentially connected to other unsolved murders. The series highlighted inconsistencies in eyewitness reports, overlooked leads, and circumstantial links to a group of people living near Berkowitz in Yonkers, including the Carr family, whose name famously appeared in one of Berkowitz's cryptic letters. Berkowitz himself participated only indirectly in the documentary through archival interviews and correspondence. While he avoided naming names or giving full details, he once again implied that there were others involved in the murders, though he framed his role as central to the shootings. He claimed that during the mid-1970s, he was heavily influenced by people engaged in occult rituals and that fear and manipulation played significant roles in his actions. However, critics argued that Berkowitz had changed his narrative too many times over the years to be considered fully credible. The NYPD has repeatedly maintained that Berkowitz acted alone, and the official position of prosecutors remains unchanged. Yet, the documentary reignited public debate, with many viewers questioning whether crucial evidence was overlooked in the original investigation. Some pointed to composite sketches made during the shootings that did not always match Berkowitz's appearance, while others noted patterns in the crimes that suggested the involvement of multiple people. Investigators who worked the case in the 1970s and 1980s remained divided, with some acknowledging unexplored leads and others insisting that Berkowitz's confession was consistent with the forensic evidence. The renewed attention also put Berkowitz back into the spotlight in ways he had previously tried to avoid. While he has occasionally cooperated with media outlets, he has consistently stated that he does not seek fame or profit from his crimes. In fact, New York's Son of Sam law, first enacted in 1977, was created specifically to prevent convicted criminals from earning money from books, movies, or other projects about their crimes. Berkowitz has repeatedly said that any participation in documentaries or interviews is meant to provide insight into his personal transformation, not to benefit financially. Still, many victims' families have criticized his involvement in public discussions, arguing that his continued visibility prolongs their trauma. Despite the ongoing speculation about accomplices, Berkowitz has devoted much of his later years to his religious work. Through his writings and occasional video messages, he has presented himself as someone who has renounced the darkness and dedicated his life to guiding others toward redemption. Supporters of his ministry claim that he has helped countless inmates confront their pasts and make positive changes. Some have written letters to the parole board urging compassion, noting Berkowitz's decades of mentoring and his consistent message of remorse. However, skeptics remain unconvinced. Law enforcement veterans, criminologists, and even some mental health experts argue that Berkowitz's religious transformation, while possibly genuine on a personal level, does not erase the enormity of his crimes. They note that he still occasionally engages with conspiracy theories, which keeps the mystery alive and draws continued media attention. For critics, this suggests a lingering desire for relevance rather than total detachment from his past. Another aspect of Berkowitz's later life that gained attention in recent years is his correspondence with members of the public. Thousands of people have written to him over the decades, some seeking explanations, others offering forgiveness, and some expressing fascination with his story. Berkowitz selectively responds, often sharing faith-based messages and urging people to avoid destructive choices. He rarely discusses the specifics of the murders, saying he no longer wishes to glorify evil by recounting graphic details. His letters, many of which are shared online by recipients, reflect a man attempting to balance remorse with his own ongoing search for personal meaning. Health issues have increasingly shaped Berkowitz's existence. In addition to his 2017 heart surgery, he suffers from several chronic conditions, including mobility problems and high blood pressure. His medical needs have required regular monitoring, and prison staff have described him as a low-risk inmate given his age and physical state. Despite these challenges, he continues his daily spiritual practices, leading services in the prison chapel and offering counseling to younger prisoners struggling with guilt, addiction, and hopelessness. For the general public, Berkowitz remains an enduring figure in true crime history. The Son of Sam killings were not only shocking for their brutality but also because they marked a turning point in how New Yorkers viewed safety in their own city. In the summer of 1977, fear had gripped the 5 boroughs, and decades later, that legacy has not been forgotten. Documentaries, books, and podcasts frequently revisit the case, ensuring that Berkowitz's name remains tied to one of the most infamous crime sprees in American history. The duality of his identity, the Son of Sam, who terrorized the city versus the Son of Hope, who now preaches redemption, continues to spark debate. Some view his transformation as proof that even those who commit unthinkable acts can change, while others see it as irrelevant, arguing that the scale of his crimes makes redemption in the public eye impossible. Regardless of perspective, Berkowitz himself seems resolved to spend his remaining years in quiet service within prison walls. As of 2025, David Berkowitz remains incarcerated, physically frailer than ever but still active in his ministry. The public fascination with his case has not waned, particularly as lingering mysteries about accomplices, motives, and overlooked evidence continue to fuel discussion. Whether he acted entirely alone or was part of something larger, his crimes left an indelible scar on New York City, one that neither his remorse nor his personal transformation can erase. Decades after his arrest, David Berkowitz, the infamous Son of Sam, continued to occupy a complicated place in public consciousness. While he remained incarcerated at Shangum Correctional Facility in New York, his story was far from static. Over the years, renewed media attention, evolving societal perspectives, and lingering questions about possible accomplices kept his narrative alive. In particular, the cult theories surrounding the murders he committed in 1976 and 1977 maintained a grip on public imagination, forcing both law enforcement and the public to re-examine what was once thought a closed case. One of the central threads in ongoing discussion involves journalist Maury Terry's long-standing claims. Terry, who began investigating the Son of Sam case in the late 1970s, argued that Berkowitz did not act alone. According to Terry, a satanic cult operating in the Bronx and Yonkers may have been responsible for orchestrating or at least influencing Berkowitz's actions. His book, The Ultimate Evil, 1987, presented evidence of occult symbolism, unexplained connections between Berkowitz and other figures, and patterns in the murders that seem to indicate coordination beyond a single perpetrator. Although these claims have never been officially substantiated, they continue to be referenced in documentaries, podcasts, and crime analysis, keeping the debate alive. Berkowitz himself has occasionally hinted at the possibility that others were involved. In letters and interviews, he suggested that he was manipulated by others, describing his role as heavily influenced by external forces. However, he has never provided full details or names. Critics and law enforcement experts argue that these statements are too vague to confirm any additional perpetrators. The NYPD, in particular, maintains that the evidence supports the conclusion that Berkowitz acted alone, based on ballistic analysis, eyewitness accounts, and his own confessions at the time of his arrest. Prosecutors involved in the case have repeatedly stated that no further action is warranted, asserting that the legal responsibility for the killings rests solely with Berkowitz. Public perception of Berkowitz has evolved significantly over the years. In the immediate aftermath of the Son of Sam killings, fear gripped New York City. The randomness of the shootings, coupled with Berkowitz's cryptic letters to the police and media, made him a symbol of unpredictable urban terror. Newspapers ran front-page stories almost daily, and New Yorkers altered their routines out of fear. Over time, however, Berkowitz's incarceration and his turn toward religious devotion softened his image in certain circles. The Son of Hope, as he came to call himself, became a focal point for discussions about redemption, faith, and the possibility of transformation even for those who commit heinous acts. Media portrayals in the 21st century have played a significant role in shaping this evolving public perception. The 2021 Netflix documentary series, The Sons of Sam: A Descent into Darkness, brought renewed attention to both Berkowitz and Terry's cult theories. Using archival footage, police reports, and interviews, the series examined the possibility that Berkowitz was not acting in isolation. While the documentary did not claim to provide definitive answers, it highlighted inconsistencies in witness statements, unexplored leads, and potential links between Berkowitz and other figures in his neighborhood. Berkowitz's participation was limited to archival interviews and written correspondence, but his hints at external influence reignited debates among viewers and researchers alike. At the same time, law enforcement officials have expressed frustration with the persistent speculation. Detectives who worked the original case argue that the cult theories are largely circumstantial and distract from the established facts. They emphasize that Berkowitz himself confessed to the shootings, detailed his methods, and provided evidence consistent with the timeline of the crimes. Yet, for a portion of the public and many true crime enthusiasts, the idea of a broader conspiracy adds a layer of intrigue that makes the case impossible to consider fully closed. In addition to cult theories, Berkowitz's later interactions with the media have further complicated public perception. He has selectively participated in interviews, written letters, and allowed excerpts of his writings to be shared. He emphasizes remorse, accountability, and religious faith, but he also occasionally references influences and mysteries from the past. This duality, a man seeking redemption while hinting at deeper secrets, has fueled both skepticism and fascination. For some, his transformation is genuine and inspiring. For others, it is a strategic effort to control his narrative and remain relevant decades after his crimes. Academics and psychologists continue to study Berkowitz's case as well. His transition from a violent offender to a prison minister provides valuable insights into human behavior, rehabilitation, and the long-term effects of incarceration. Scholars often highlight the combination of mental health challenges, social isolation, and possible manipulation in his early life, emphasizing that understanding these factors is key to both criminal psychology and broader discussions about justice. At the same time, experts caution against conflating his personal transformation with absolution in the eyes of the public. The gravity of his crimes remains undeniable. The Son of Sam case has also become a touchstone in broader discussions about media ethics. The initial frenzy, characterized by sensationalist reporting and speculative headlines, arguably amplified Berkowitz's notoriety. Documentaries, books, and online content now revisit this history, analyzing not only the crimes themselves but also the media coverage and its impact on society. Researchers point out that the continued fascination with Berkowitz illustrates how public narratives around crime, fear, and redemption evolve over time, often blurring the lines between reporting and entertainment. Another factor influencing Berkowitz's modern legacy is his age and health. Now in his 70s, he faces physical limitations, including mobility challenges and chronic conditions common to his age group. These realities have made it clear that he will remain in prison for the remainder of his life. This has somewhat tempered the debates over parole, as his public statements of acceptance, combined with his physical frailty, make actual release increasingly unlikely. Nevertheless, parole hearings continue to occur on schedule, providing victims' families an opportunity to speak and ensuring that the process remains transparent. The long-term impact on survivors and the families of Berkowitz's victims cannot be understated. Even decades later, many have said that the pain of losing loved ones cannot fully fade. The persistence of cult theories and new media portrayals sometimes reignites grief and anger, illustrating the enduring psychological consequences of violent crime. For them, Berkowitz's personal transformation offers little solace. Their focus remains on remembrance, healing, and ensuring that the narrative of the victims is not overshadowed by the notoriety of the perpetrator. Despite these complexities, Berkowitz's life serves as a case study in criminal justice, media influence, and human psychology. His trajectory from random urban killer to prison minister demonstrates both the capacity for personal change and the limits of redemption in the court of public opinion. Researchers and the public alike continue to wrestle with questions that span morality, legality, and the human psyche. How do we reconcile remorse with unthinkable violence? Can rehabilitation coexist with lifelong accountability? And how much of Berkowitz's story will remain unknown due to secrecy, manipulation, or selective disclosure? David Berkowitz, infamously known as the Son of Sam, remains one of the most recognized figures in American criminal history. His crimes shook New York City in the summer of 1976 and the early months of 1977, leaving 6 people dead and 7 wounded, creating a climate of fear unlike anything the city had experienced in decades. While Berkowitz's early years in prison were marked by isolation and the weight of infamy, the later decades of his incarceration have been characterized by a unique combination of personal transformation, media scrutiny, and ongoing public debate. Part of what makes his story enduring is the tension between the narrative of remorse and rehabilitation he presents today, and the chilling legacy of the violence he committed as a young man. Since the 2010s, Berkowitz's life inside Shangum Correctional Facility has been relatively stable. He is older and frailer than when first incarcerated, facing typical health challenges associated with age, including mobility limitations and cardiovascular concerns. Despite these physical realities, he has remained active in spiritual work, leading religious services for fellow inmates, and engaging in one-on-one counseling. His faith, which he adopted more fully in the 1980s, is central to his identity in recent years. He often credits his religious conversion with giving him purpose, a framework to understand his past actions, and a means of guiding others away from the destructive paths he once walked. Berkowitz's public presence, however, has never fully disappeared. Documentaries, interviews, and new reporting have continued to explore both the crimes and the man behind them. Notably, the Netflix series The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, 2021, renewed interest in Berkowitz's possible connections to a larger network of individuals, including alleged occult involvement, a topic that has fascinated conspiracy theorists and true crime enthusiasts for decades. While Berkowitz's statements remain cautious and nonspecific, his previous hints about outside influence have fueled ongoing speculation about whether he truly acted alone. Law enforcement continues to assert that there is no evidence supporting this theory, maintaining that Berkowitz's detailed confessions and corroborated crime scenes confirm he was the sole perpetrator. Yet, for the public, the ambiguity adds a layer of intrigue to a story that has long captured imaginations. In the last decade, Berkowitz has participated in limited media interactions, often emphasizing remorse and the transformative role of faith in his life. He has expressed a consistent message. While he accepts full responsibility for his actions, he hopes to prevent others from repeating his mistakes. Through letters, archived interviews, and writings for the Son of Hope prison ministry, he communicates with a broader audience, offering advice to individuals struggling with anger, isolation, or destructive impulses. For many, this presents a curious juxtaposition. The same individual who once terrorized a city is now offering guidance and mentorship to people in distress. It raises profound questions about human capacity for change, the limits of redemption, and the ways society grapples with the legacies of violence. Berkowitz's parole hearings have remained a recurring public focal point. While he has repeatedly stated that he does not seek release, New York state law mandates review for life-sentenced prisoners every 2 years. These hearings are both symbolic and procedural, giving victims' families the opportunity to voice their opinions and the parole board a chance to assess the inmates' current behavior. In recent hearings, Berkowitz has continued to express deep remorse, apologizing to victims' families and acknowledging the permanent harm caused. The board has consistently denied parole, citing the severity of the crimes, public safety considerations, and the enduring impact on the victims' families. Victims' families continue to be central to the ongoing narrative surrounding Berkowitz. For them, the lasting pain of lost loved ones is an ever-present reality. Some have expressed relief at the repeated denials of parole, noting that these decisions respect the gravity of Berkowitz's actions and honor the memory of those he killed. Others have spoken publicly about the emotional burden of attending hearings, reliving trauma decades after the crimes occurred. Their perspectives highlight the complex interplay between justice, rehabilitation, and the emotional aftermath of violent crime. Media portrayals in the 2010s and 2020s have expanded beyond documentaries to include podcasts, books, and academic discussions. Researchers often explore Berkowitz's story in the context of criminal psychology, urban fear, and the social dynamics of 1970s New York. His case illustrates how media coverage can shape public perception, sometimes creating a figure whose infamy eclipses the individuals affected by the crimes themselves. Scholars stress the importance of balancing attention to Berkowitz with remembrance of the victims, emphasizing that understanding his psychology should not overshadow the human cost of his actions. In addition to his notoriety and parole hearings, Berkowitz's correspondence with the public has drawn attention. Over decades, thousands of people have written letters, seeking insight into his motivations or hoping to understand how he transformed his life. He has responded selectively, often focusing on themes of faith, personal accountability, and spiritual guidance. Importantly, he avoids graphic descriptions of his crimes, aiming to offer lessons without sensationalizing violence. This approach has sparked discussion about how criminals can engage with society responsibly while acknowledging past harm. The cultural fascination with Berkowitz also intersects with ongoing debates about rehabilitation and the criminal justice system. His case raises ethical and philosophical questions. Can someone who committed heinous acts ever truly reform? Should society measure rehabilitation in terms of behavior and contributions within prison, or is the severity of the original crime an overriding factor? Berkowitz's example is often cited in both scholarly and public debates, illustrating the tension between punishment, personal transformation, and the public's right to safety. Psychologists studying Berkowitz's behavior have examined factors such as childhood instability, mental health, and social isolation. While these factors do not excuse his actions, they provide context for understanding how he became capable of committing such acts. His later embrace of religion and mentorship offers a counterpoint, demonstrating that even individuals with deeply troubling histories can seek to change. This duality is central to the continuing fascination with Berkowitz. He embodies both the darkest aspects of human behavior and the potential for personal transformation under constrained circumstances. By the 2020s, Berkowitz had largely settled into the later years of his life in prison. He remained physically frail but mentally engaged, continuing to lead religious services and correspond with those seeking guidance. He occasionally engaged with media projects that revisited his case, always emphasizing remorse, spiritual growth, and the importance of accountability. However, the shadow of the past, the murders that shook New York City, continued to dominate public perception. For many, his later life transformation offers a case study in redemption. For others, it serves as a reminder that the consequences of violent acts are enduring and irrevocable. In the public consciousness, Berkowitz has become more than just a criminal. He is a figure through which society examines broader themes. The interplay of crime, media, urban fear, rehabilitation, and personal responsibility is central to the ongoing discussion. Documentaries, academic papers, and news retrospectives continually reference his story, emphasizing both his crimes and his later life as a means of exploring societal and psychological questions. While the specifics of his day-to-day life are less known, the symbolic weight of the Son of Sam case remains potent, offering lessons about human behavior, the impact of violence, and the complex nature of justice. David Berkowitz's journey into his later years underscores a simple but profound reality. The consequences of one's actions ripple across decades, affecting countless lives, shaping public consciousness, and influencing ongoing debates about justice and morality. His story is a reminder of the enduring impact of crime, the challenges of rehabilitation, and the intricate relationship between individual transformation and societal memory. As David Berkowitz entered the later decades of his life behind bars, the story of the Son of Sam evolved from the immediate terror of random shootings in 1976 to 77 into a multifaceted narrative encompassing crime, psychology, media, and societal reflection. In the beginning, his actions had created a climate of fear that paralyzed New York City. For weeks, residents altered routines, avoided being out after dark, and scrutinized every stranger. The immediacy of danger gave rise to intense media coverage, public anxiety, and intense speculation about his motives. Over time, as Berkowitz was apprehended and imprisoned, the narrative shifted. While he remained a convicted murderer, decades of incarceration and personal transformation reframed public understanding, allowing society to examine not only his crimes but also the conditions and consequences that surrounded them. In reflecting on Berkowitz's legacy, it is essential first to recognize the enduring impact on the victims and their families. The names of those he killed, Sal Lupo, Donna Loria, Carl Denaro, Rosemary Keenan, Jody Valenti, and Alexander Esau, remain central to any discussion of the Son of Sam case. Survivors of the shootings, as well as the relatives of those who died, have described the lasting trauma in interviews and public statements. The psychological toll is immeasurable. Fear, grief, and anxiety persisted long after the last shot was fired. Their voices remind society that while the criminal's story may be sensationalized in books, documentaries, and podcasts, the human cost is real, enduring, and deeply personal. Beyond the immediate victims, Berkowitz's crimes reshaped public perceptions of urban safety and law enforcement response. The 1970s in New York were already marked by social and economic tension, rising crime rates, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Berkowitz's shootings amplified these anxieties, highlighting both the unpredictability of violent crime and the challenges faced by police in responding to a serial shooter. The NYPD's investigative methods, particularly the use of community alerts, media collaboration, and rapid investigation of tip lines, became case studies in law enforcement protocols for serial crime. Today, criminologists still reference the Son of Sam investigation as a landmark case demonstrating both the strengths and limitations of mid-20th century policing. Media coverage has also been a defining feature of Berkowitz's story. During the height of the killings, newspapers ran daily updates, often sensationalizing details and emphasizing the fear factor. Berkowitz's letters to the police, wherein he claimed demonic guidance and cryptic motives, only heightened public fascination. Over the decades, documentaries, books, and podcasts revisited these events, often examining the balance between factual reporting and sensationalism. Series like Netflix's The Sons of Sam in 2021 and numerous investigative books have dissected the case, exploring everything from potential accomplices to the psychological profile of Berkowitz himself. While some theorists have suggested broader conspiracies or cult involvement, official law enforcement conclusions maintain that Berkowitz acted alone, a determination supported by ballistic evidence, eyewitness accounts, and his own confessions. Berkowitz's personal evolution in prison has also shaped the narrative. In the 1980s, he embraced Christianity, joining prison ministries and engaging in counseling for fellow inmates. He adopted the name Son of Hope to signify this transformation, seeking a path of redemption and spiritual guidance. While this shift does not erase his past or the pain he caused, it adds nuance to the public's understanding. He became an example of how individuals can attempt to redirect their lives even after committing egregious acts, illustrating both the potential for rehabilitation and the complexity of human behavior. Psychologists studying his case have pointed to factors such as childhood instability, social isolation, and mental health struggles as contributing elements, while emphasizing that understanding these contexts does not excuse or diminish responsibility for his crimes. Public fascination with Berkowitz, while sometimes controversial, reflects broader societal questions about crime, morality, and justice. He remains a case study in the interplay between notoriety and accountability. Documentaries and interviews with him explore not only his personal narrative but also the ethics of media coverage, the cultural appetite for true crime, and the long-term consequences of violent actions. The duality of fear and fascination in the public psyche has ensured that his story remains relevant decades after the crimes, prompting discussions about ethics, psychology, and rehabilitation. Parole hearings, though largely procedural due to his repeated statements that he does not seek release, continue to serve as public moments for reflection. Families of victims are given the opportunity to speak, and the parole board evaluates his ongoing behavior, remorse, and potential risk. These hearings underscore the enduring legal and emotional implications of the case. Even as Berkowitz ages and experiences typical health challenges associated with long-term incarceration, these evaluations provide a framework for accountability and offer a platform for victims' voices to remain central in the narrative. Another critical aspect of Berkowitz's legacy involves the broader cultural impact. His story has influenced literature, film, and academic inquiry into serial crimes. It has become a reference point for discussions of criminal psychology, media influence, and urban social dynamics. In classrooms, criminal justice programs often examine the case to understand investigative techniques, media handling, and offender profiling. In popular culture, his story has been explored in books, TV series, and podcasts, often prompting audiences to consider the complex interplay of fear, notoriety, and human behavior. Importantly, Berkowitz's life prompts questions about redemption and societal responsibility. Can someone who has caused immense harm seek to contribute positively to the lives of others? His prison ministry work suggests that, under certain conditions, personal transformation is possible. However, the juxtaposition of this transformation with the reality of his victims' losses illustrates the delicate balance between forgiveness, justice, and accountability. Society grapples with these questions every time the Son of Sam narrative is revisited, reflecting the broader challenges of dealing with violent crime ethically and empathetically. In examining his long-term impact, it is also vital to note the continued interest in victims' narratives. Survivors and family members have shared their stories in interviews, books, and documentaries, emphasizing that the human cost remains central to any discussion. Their reflections provide perspective, ensuring that the focus is not solely on the criminal or his notoriety. The inclusion of victims' voices in media, research, and public discourse helps to contextualize Berkowitz's actions, highlighting the lasting consequences of violence and the resilience of those affected. In conclusion, David Berkowitz's legacy is multifaceted. He will forever be remembered for the terror he inflicted on New York City during the summer of 1976. But he is also a case study in the evolving understanding of crime, psychology, and rehabilitation. His life illustrates the intersection of public fear, media influence, and the enduring questions about morality, accountability, and the human capacity for change. The Son of Sam's story reminds society that violent crime leaves lasting ripples, shaping the lives of victims, the responses of law enforcement, the treatment of media, and the conversations we continue to have about justice, redemption, and the nature of evil. Decades after the final shot, Berkowitz remains behind bars, a man of remorse, reflection, and public fascination. The narrative surrounding him is neither simple nor static. It is layered with fear, intrigue, and profound societal questions. His story, while anchored in a specific historical moment, continues to resonate as a lens through which society examines the complexities of crime, punishment, and the potential for human transformation. It is a testament to the enduring consequences of violence and the ongoing struggle to understand both the perpetrators and the victims of such acts.